I've had a lot of requests to do a video on processing information from a one-shot color camera. Today we're going to do just that. This image was sent to me from a friend who lives in Greece. He had been trying to process it himself and said that he kept ending up with this, and he wanted to see if I could derive anything more out of the image. It was shot in a Bortle 5 area, without any kind of filters, on a mirrorless camera, and represents 4 hours and 15 minutes integration. And as you can see, it's also a very low focal length image. But there is the potential for this to be a very beautiful image. It's of the Orion's belt region and contains the Great Orion Nebula, the Flame in the Horsehead Nebulae, the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula, and a bit of the Bogeyman Nebula. Not to mention a significant portion of the huge crescent of nebulosity around that area. He did his developing in Serial, so he sent me the original FITS file which had only been stacked in Serial, and I'm going to reprocess it using my methodology. As always, I'll use several developing applications to make use of the unique strengths of each. Even though there's only 4 hours integration here, there's a good start, and I think more detail can be pulled out of this image. So let's give it a shot. I'm going to begin by opening the image in PixInsight. I'm going to hit Ctrl-A to activate the screen transfer function on the image. When I do, you can immediately see that there is a significant gradient in this image. So I'm actually going to begin with what I consider to be the best gradient removal tool out there at this time. Now, I'm not an expert in gradient removal tools, however. I live in a dark sky region, and this is the only time in my entire life I've ever had to deal with light pollution. But Graxpert's very successful at stripping moonlight out of images in those rare times that I use it. So I think it'll do the job here just fine. I'll open Graxpert and then reopen this image in Graxpert. Once in Graxpert, I'm going to let its AI assess and remove the gradient. This will take a moment, so I'll go ahead and time skip through the process. That's very well cleaned up, so I'll open the Graxpert edition in PixInsight. Once in PixInsight, I'll apply the screen transfer function again. Now we can see there is another significant problem in this image. There are significant overlap problems around the borders, and perhaps a little distortion showing in the upper right and lower right corners. Before going any further, the overlap error has to go. Not only will this allow the tools to perform better on the image down the line, but it will have the immediate benefits of making the image size smaller, so it'll be faster to work with. I'll use PixInsight's dynamic crop tool to do the cropping. Now I'm not sure, but I think my friend may already have used a tool like SCNR to remove some of the green that often turns up in one-shot color images. But I think I still see a little lingering green. For myself, I don't care for SCNR. It just seems to pull more information out of an image that I want, so I try to avoid using it. So instead, I'm going to use PixInsight's very convenient Split RGB Channels tool to split the image up into its red, green, and blue components. Because this image was shot with a one-shot color camera, there is no luminance or L component. If you haven't used that tool before, it's found right up here, and it will strip the image apart into its red, green, and blue channels. You may be surprised that each of those channels will appear as black and white. That's because when stripped, they're just monochrome information that cannot give an accurate rendition of color until they're combined back together. This is because all color sensors actually only record black and white information. Color is a perception of living beings that happen to have color vision capability, and it is created in our brains by the way our brains combine the frequency information from monochrome red, green, and blue ranges of light. Well, when you use a tool like PixInsight or another photo editor to combine red, green, and blue color channels, they create color in the same way. So I'm spacing out the 3 separate channels, and I'm going to give them shorter, more convenient names, R, G, and B. Since I don't like to use SCNR to do initial color correction, I'm going to use the linear fit tool. The first thing I need to do is open up the statistics tool and find the image that has the highest median. However, a statistical analysis of all 3 images reveals the medians to be only trivially different. So it's arbitrary to worry about which image has the highest median. Since it really doesn't matter which image I decide on for the reference image in this case, I'll just grab the red image. Then I'll apply the linear fit process to the green and blue images. I'm not sure this is entirely necessary, but I always figure with developing, you might as well go the extra mile. It only takes a couple minutes and may well yield better results down the road. This part of the processing that I do in PixInsight, I think is like laying a good foundation. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I really never edit an image in PixInsight because I do not consider it a good photo editor, not even close. Its strength lies in its ability to do initial stacking, histogram stretching, and run excellent tools such as RC Astro's exterminators. After running linear fit, I decided to run the blur exterminator separately on each channel. This is because, when using monochrome information, I have observed in the past that the blur exterminator gives slightly better, cleaner results when operating on each channel separately. So since color camera information is really just monocamera information, except that the color channels are permanently embedded over the camera sensor, I'm assuming it'll work the same way this way. And this is another one of those things that maybe it'll take me a couple extra minutes, but if it has the potential to give a slightly better improvement, why not use it? My general philosophy toward photo development is, if I'm going to spend, or my friend is going to spend in this case, hours, potentially over multiple nights shooting an image, one might as well put the extra time into developing it to get the best out of that information. Alright, we don't need to watch Blur Exterminator crunch through the red, green, and blue components, so I'll go ahead and skip the rest of this. Because the color camera shoots its red, green, and blue channels at the same time, there is no need to use star alignment to align the three channels. So I can go ahead and color combine the information. I'll do that quickly in the channel combination tool by dragging in the icons for the R, G, and B channels into the channel combination tool and hitting the action icon. It's very fast and almost immediately gives an outcome. Let's go ahead and apply the screen transfer function. That looks good. Now I can see there is still a bit of lingering green in this image, but I'll deal with that later on in processing. What I need to do right now is get a star plate. So I'm going to clone this image by clicking and grabbing on the Image tab, upper left, permanently applying the screen transfer function stretch to the image because the screen transfer function does a really good job producing stars. Then I'll run the noise exterminator, followed by the star exterminator to produce the star plate, which I'll save and put back into the image later on. Note that the unscreen stars checkbox was selected during the extraction of the stars here. This is because the histogram of this image has been stretched, so it's best to use unscreen stars on it. Then I'll save the star plate and set it aside for later. Now this becomes a long, boring process while the star exterminator crunches numbers, so I'll just skip through it. Now I'm going to go back to the unstretched original image and run the star exterminator on it again. Because this image is not stretched, I'll uncheck the star exterminator's unscreen stars box. And since I don't want the star plate from this image, I'll also uncheck the generate stars box. I just want to clean up the stars from this image because that's the background nebulosity and that's what we're now going to focus on developing. Now making star plates is easy. The far more important and foundational part of image developing here has to do with the incredible range of brightness within this image. In particular, the Great Orion Nebula, and to a lesser degree, the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula, are exceedingly bright compared to the rest of the image. Their brightest points have probably been blown out just a little bit in the initial imaging. Still, I think a lot of information can be retained. To do so, I'm going to make 2 clones of this image, making 3 starless images of the nebula. Then, I'm going to stretch the histogram differently on each one of those plates. I'm going to label one of those clones dim and just barely stretch the histogram, with the goal of retaining as much information in the brightest parts of the Great Orion Nebula and the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula as possible. I'm going to designate another one of those clones as the mid-brightness level and stretch it with the goal of revealing the very bright outer regions of those nebulae. And then I'm going to designate the final version bright and stretch it with the goal of revealing the rest of the nebulosity throughout the image. The noise exterminator was then run on the dim, medium, and bright versions of the nebulosity, and then they were exported as lossless TIFFs. Now let's go to work on them in Affinity Photo. In Affinity Photo, I'm going to attempt to retain all the information from the dimmest to the brightest regions by building the layers beginning from the dimmest and going to the brightest. So the first thing I'll do is drag in the dim layer. Then I'll drag in the middle bright layer and begin making some initial corrections. It's easy to align each layer over the other by using Affinity Photo Snap tool up here. Now I need to add the information from the 2 layers together. With information shot on a monochrome camera, especially using LRGB, I would almost always do this using the luminosity composite mode. But with information shot from a color camera, I find Lighten is the better composite mode. Lighten adds the information from its layer to the layer below in an attenuated fashion, respecting the bright regions, which mitigates the risk of blowing regions of the image out. However, the information from the core of the Great Orion Nebula was so bright that it was pretty well blown out even in the middle bright rendition of the image. So I'm going to open a mask in the middle layer by clicking the mask tool right down here. then clicking on the paintbrush, selecting black, with a flow of 20 and a hardness of 0 to make a nice soft brush, with a delicate touch, and then I'm going to erase out the blown out middle bright information from the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula cores and the Great Orion Nebula core. A black paintbrush on a mask is like erasing that region of an image, and I want to erase out specifically and only the blown out regions in the cores of those nebulae, which will allow the detail from the layer below to show through. Now it's time to drag in the bright version of the starless nebulosity. This will reveal the surrounding nebulosity much better. Once it's snapped into place, I need to find the best composite mode. Normally I would use the lighten composite mode, but I'm going to experiment and see what the various ones do, because I want to find the best possible way to reveal that dim nebulosity. After several minutes of experimenting with various composite modes, it turned out that the color dodge mode was the best composite mode here. It is an unusual choice. I almost never use the color dodge composite mode for astrophotography. But in this case, it brightens the color of the dim nebulosity and refines the boundaries of the information, revealing the detail and the edges. It even imparts a wonderful glow to the nebulae themselves. The problem with color dodge is it does add bright to bright areas and tends to blow them out as you can see them here. But I'll deal with this in the same way that it dealt with the mid-bright layer when adding it to the dim layer. I'll just put a mask in the bright layer and erase out the bright blown out regions. I've also duplicated the bright layer and added it to the information by using the very strong screen composite mode. Watch what happens when I combine the bright color dodged layer to the bright screen composite layer. One gets a very strong effect, but at the same time, so much of the nebulosity is revealed. In the rest of the editing, I'm going to keep these two layers together, but I need to attenuate the effects of the screen mode. That's easy. I'll just crank down its opacity using the opacity slider. "39% opacity seems to give us the effect we're looking for. In the layer stack window on the right, you can see there are other bright layers. Those are leftover layers from when I was experimenting with adding different composite modes to find the one with the best effect. I've turned off all the others except for the color dodge and the screen mode. Now I've opened the Levels tool to get to work on some initial color balancing of the image. And since there is a bit of green tint in the stars too, I've dragged in the star plates and put the Levels tool above both the star plates and the nebulosity layer. For color balancing, there are a few tools more powerful and more useful than the Levels tool. But I haven't talked about it all that much, so let me take a moment to go into why it is so useful. In the Levels tool, you can operate on the master channel, which is all the color channels combined, or you can operate discretely on the red, green, and blue channels. You can increase the black point, which increases the threshold the signal must cross to show up at all. This makes space blacker and helps to get rid of unwanted stray light. You can decrease the white level tool, which increases the brightness of all the pixels, making the image overall brighter. The gamma slider in the middle tightens up the range of brightness in which any discrete color or all the colors together in the master channel can appear. It helps define detail within an image, like the contrast tool, but with less risk of black crushing. And it's also great for removing stray moonlight from an image. The output black level adds white to the black, lightening it, and the output white level darkens the whites, making things dimmer. So when level balancing was done, all the information was merged into a single new layer, and the unused layers, except for the dim layer, were put into a group and the group was made invisible. Then I put another mask into the new merged layer, made the dim layer visible, zoomed way in, and erased out from the merged layer the very brightest points of the Great Orion Nebula, right near the trapezium core. This allowed more of the finer detail that was revealed in the dim stretch to show through. Finally, this was once again merged into a new LRGB layer, and the noise exterminator operated on it to remove any lingering noise developing may have brought out. And this layer was exported to PhotoLab 8 for fine color and brightness adjustment. In PhotoLab 8, DxO Smart Lighting was turned on. Smart Lighting does a great job balancing the brightness between darker and lighter areas. PhotoLab 8's very precise and powerful color sliders were then used to balance the difference between the darker, mid-bright, and bright regions of the image, with the goal of revealing fainter detail and avoiding blowing out the brightest detail. Local adjustments, which are confined to specific areas of an image by way of color, brightness, or region selection, were then applied to each of the discrete nebulae within this area to further enhance their detail, sharpness, contrast, and color. In particular, the goal with the Great Orion Nebula was to bring down the extreme brightness of the outer regions of the nebula, in such a way as to allow the fine detail and faint reddish color within the heart of the nebula to show up better. The control point tool was the best tool for this. I could use it to set a circle around each one of those nebulous regions, and only within each one of those circles would the adjustments be applied. Further adjustments were made to the tone sliders, in particular drawing down the extreme brightness of the Great Orion Nebula, and the micro contrast and sharpness were each enhanced a bit to refine the detail of each of the nebulae. In the Color tab, specific colors for enhancement can be selected. General saturation was enhanced, and we can see the color is overall good, but there is a bit of green showing up more and more throughout the image. In particular, it's showing up in the nebulosity around the Great Orion Nebula. Now, the whitish surrounding nebulosity does have a hint of cyan in it, and I think the green is an artifact resulting from how the extreme brightness of the nebula interacts with the way the software calculates color. That was corrected in a local adjustment by slightly desaturating cyan. Operating on the light curve in the Light tab, adjustments were made to luminosity to further enhance the contrast between darker and brighter areas of the image. This helps detail to show up even better. By clicking on the Tone Picker option here, it's possible to go directly onto the screen, click and hold down the left mouse button, and then move the mouse up and down to make specific changes to the light curve at that area of brightness. Now notice the modeled information in the upper left of the image. That happens when there is insufficient information to produce a clear image, especially in darker regions. There's no way to fix nor restore this that I know of, so I find that essentially applying a band-aid to these areas is the best thing to do with them. And the best band-aid in this case is a little bit of Gaussian blur. So I'll go back to the Local Adjustments tab and open up 3 control points right in this region. So the next adjustment only affects there. Then I'll just go down to the blur slider and very gently apply a little bit of blur just until I see that modeling soften up. When it's a little soft and the stars are applied over the information, the modeling will barely show up at all. 8 out of 100 points of blur is all it takes. I think I'm going to take some steps to improve the sharpness and color of this tail of nebulosity down here as well. So I'll open up a series of local adjustments points in that area, then crank up the saturation and the micro contrast just a little bit in those areas. And in this area, I'll also skew the color wheel slightly to the red. Now the image is ready to be exported as a lossless TIFF back into Affinity Photo for a couple final adjustments. The color balance star layer is all ready to go, and I'll just drag in the newly edited layer from PhotoLab 8 directly under the star layer. Because of the snap tool, it'll snap precisely into place. And I'll just turn on the stars. That looks very good. There's just still, I think, a little bit of lingering green in the image. We'll deal with it in a moment. I can further refine the sharpness of this image by using the frequency separator. But rather than doing a full separation and then synergistic sharpening like I usually do, what I'm going to do is only partially separate the high frequency information. To do this, I'll duplicate the starless layer and apply the frequency separation tool on it, moving the slider bar over just a little, which will draw out the very fine detail. Then I'll run the separation and delete the low frequency layer. Then I'll use the soft light composite mode on the new high frequency layer to add that information back to the rest of the image. The effect is subtle, as it should be, but it does nicely add definition to the fine features within the image. Now I'm going to do a little more cropping because I want to get these errors here and here out of the image. Now, I'm going to deal with that lingering green both within the nebulosity and within the stars. I'll begin by opening up a curves tool within the star layer and selecting the green channel, and very slightly drawing down on it till the stars look more blue and red, with no green cast. After all, there are no green stars. And I'll rinse and repeat this exact same operation on the starless master with our nebulosity. Then, one more touch up with the levels tool in the starless layer so it doesn't affect the stars. I'm just going to very slightly crank up the gamma, which will very slightly restrict the R, G, and B colors from showing up in darker regions, further refining the difference between the space and the nebulosity, hopefully increasing the dramatic appearance within this image. It is a wonderfully dramatic image that my friend shot, revealing so much of the nebulosity and the busyness within this region of the sky. A truly extraordinary region of the sky. And with that, we are now at the final image. Thank you to Avapok for allowing me the chance to use this information. It's really a beautiful image, and I also apologize because I am sure I mispronounced your name. But it really is a beautiful, dramatic image of this region of the sky. And thank you to everyone else for watching. A lot of you have asked if I could do some videos on one-shot color camera processing, and I know I haven't done that in quite some time, pretty much since I built the observatory. I have a telescope with a color camera, but at the moment it's mothballed. Until, well, frankly, I can afford to get a second mount and get a second observatory built. Hopefully I'll be able to do that this summer. If you have any thoughts, observations, or questions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you just as fast as I can. Wherever you are, I hope the weather is cooperating and your days and nights are fair. Now get out there and shoot the sky.